Hey, everybody, I'm Scott Wikle. You're listening to My Kind of Country. Thanks for joining us on a Monday night. My special guest, you hear her every week on our show with CDX Country News. And I thought it would be really nice tonight to have her on the show and give us a little more background on her career. She's been a TV and radio host, producer, interviewer. You saw her on the Grand Ole Opry Live for many years on CMT. She's hosted specials on TNN, the GAC network. She's been involved with Fanfare for many years. She is right at the heart and soul of country music in Nashville, and it's a pleasure to welcome Shannon McCombs to My Kind of Country. Shannon, how are you tonight?
Hey, Scott. I'm great. Thank you for the wonderful intro.
Well, it's an honor to finally be able to talk to you and get a little more information to my listeners. They hear you every week on my show, so.
Well, sure appreciate that. Appreciate you airing the show.
Well, Shannon, I became familiar with you some years ago. I used to work for a radio station up here called WLDR Sunny Country, and we used to air a program called America's Country Countdown with Kix Brooks. And I know that you produced and pretty much did everything behind the scenes on that show.
How about that? I worked with Kix for quite a while there. We did. He had initially hired me to come in and write the show, and within just a few weeks, I was producing it. And he and I ended up co-writing it together. He's a really good writer. Well, we know his songwriting is good, but he's also a really good writer. So, kind of took advantage of that and co-wrote it with him for a while.
That's great. It was a good show. I listened to it every week, and so that was the first time I knew your name. And so when the CDX Country News thing came up, I'm like, I know who that is. So,
I had been doing that show for different stations off and on for a few years. And when I was doing television, I used to do a show here in Nashville, the NBC station, and I did a short little information segment on the show. And I don't know, I just always wanted to continue doing that. So I had talked with CDX about it, and they were kind enough to syndicate it for me. So I really enjoy doing it because I'm, doing the interviews throughout the week, and there's so much great information out there. I love just sharing it.
Absolutely, and I do appreciate that you always include the legends of country music as well. That's what we play on our show.
I'm old enough to remember the legends when most of them were younger artists.
Yeah.
New artists. That's my favorite music is that older music. Not that I don't like the new stuff, because I do, but I really do love the older country. It's just hard to get past it,
Well, tell me a little bit about how you got into the whole music business.
I started in radio right out of high school, 1980, and first radio station I worked with was in Cave City, Kentucky. If you know where that's at, it's there where Mammoth Cave is.
Oh, yeah.
That area?
Yep.
Yep. Little AM daytimer radio station, and I worked with them for a while. I think my very first job with them was selling commercials because I had absolutely no experience, and they gave me a job and told me if I could sell commercials, I could voice them. So eventually, that summer, I worked for them all summer, and then everybody went away to school for the fall except me, so I ended up getting a job by default on the air. And they just needed somebody really bad. They hired me to work on air. So it's that was my entrance into radio. I was trying to get into radio. It's been a goal since I was in high school. So just kind of hung in there until somebody said yes.
Wow, that's great. You've done thousands of interviews, and like I said when we started, I'm a little intimidated because you're definitely the pro here. What are some of the remarkable and outstanding interviews for you as far as a broadcaster that you've done?
Hey, I know who you've interviewed. You're the pro here. You can't hold back on that one. I know better. I feel like I've been being in Nashville is just, a lot of it is placement, because, it's the hub for country music, and that's why I seem to be, involved with more interviews. But it's kind of, I don't know how to narrow it down to favorites because I have so many. But when I look back, I think probably one of my favorites ever has been working with Ray Price. Had an opportunity to work with him a few times. I used to work with XM Radio when it first started, and he would come by the Country Music Hall of Fame, which is where our studio was. And so I had an open door policy. Anybody, you didn't have to have anything set up, just come by, and he would do that, which was awesome. And I remember being in one day, and Glenn Campbell came through the Hall of Fame, which was pretty cool to talk with him. The Hall of Fame, just the placement of the place, had brought in a lot of stars, and it was a great way to meet a lot of people and hear their stories. I mean, you know how some of these artists are. You don't even have to ask questions. You just open up the mic, and some of them had the best stories to tell. I could just sit and listen to them all day. Mm-hmm. Price was a real character too. I'm telling you, he was. He left the studio. I'll never forget this. One day he left the studio, and right before he left, he'd asked me about a song. And XM Radio always had just about everything you could imagine in their catalog, and it was something I didn't have. And it was a song he had recorded with Willie Nelson. Well, we had said goodbye, and he left the studio, and ends up he comes back into the studio about 10 minutes later with an album. It was a CD of him and Willie, and he had gone out into the gift store there at the Hall of Fame and bought it and brought it back into the studio. He was something else.
That's
really
great.
Enjoyed him.
I got to see him a couple times in concert, and he was. I called it going to the woodshed. I mean, you sat there and watched him sing so effortlessly and just absolutely blow away an audience, and he never moved over an inch from that microphone. And he was so classy, and the band was all dressed up in suits, and it was just amazing. He was like the Frank Sinatra of country music,
He was mesmerizing, wasn't he?
He certainly was, without a doubt.
The way you described him perfectly, because he could stand there at the microphone and nothing moved but his lips, and you were just glued to him. Mm-hmm. To watch him was just mesmerizing.
Tell me about working at the Grand Ole Opry.
Well, what a great place to work. Gosh, I just loved it out there. I never once walked through that door without, looking up and saying, thank you, God, because it was just such a blessing to be there. I worked, I guess my first job out there was when I worked with CMT, as you mentioned. I hosted a show on CMT. It was backstage at the Opry, and but after that went away, they had asked me if I would be interested in working on a radio show they were thinking about starting. And they ended up syndicating a weekly radio show, and they had hired me to come out and do all the interviews for it, which was really a big baptism for me. All this music and the artists that I'd loved for so long, getting to work with them, and ended up doing that show. It ran for 13 years. So that's where I really kind of learned more about doing interviews. I would average 7 to 10 a week out there, and pretty much every time the doors were open, I was out there with my recorder, and they tell me who they wanted me to interview that week. So it was quite an experience. It was one I'd love to have again.
And I suppose you probably had to do a lot of these on the fly. You probably didn't have a lot of prep time either.
Well, they would send me a list each week of who they had talked to and set up interviews with, and so I'd have some time usually, but it got to the point where you'd have conversations with someone, and if you interview them a few weeks later, you kind of built up a relationship with them, and so it's kind of what happened with the Opry. You get to know everybody out there and what they're up to, because in the work situation, and it made it a lot easier you know. But I will always love the fact that I worked with little Jimmy Dickens. You know, he and I used to joke about it. I said, I get paid by the same people you get paid. You just get paid more than I do.
A lot of those older artists had such a dynamic personality with people they were around, with their fans, and with people like us, you know. And it was really amazing to watch them behind the scenes, because they were just as spot on as they were on stage, you know.
Oh yeah, I think of little Jimmy. You know, he would always be at the Opry early. A lot of times I was there maybe an hour or so before showtime, because sometimes they would schedule an interview before somebody went on, and you know, the building would be quiet, and you go through and say hello to little Jimmy, because he always had his door open, and he would be sitting in his dressing room. He'd always get there early, and usually end up going home late. So
Wow,
everybody wanted to stop by and say hello to him.
that's amazing. Did you ever get to spend any time with Mr. Acuff?
You know that I met him once, but that was before my time at the Opry. When I first moved to Nashville, I had gone out to Opryland one day, and my boyfriend at the time, he said, I've been out here a few times. He said, I know where Roy Acuff lives. And if you recall, he used to have a place that he lived at right there at the side of Opryland. Mm-hmm. And there was a path over to the park from where he lived. They had built a place for him right there on the park land. And there was a bench that sat over in the shade that he would sit at a lot. And sure enough, we walked over there, and there's Roy Acuff sitting on the bench. And I have a picture from that, actually. The first and only time I ever met him. But he was very polite.
Wow, that's incredible.
I think I was 8 the first time I was at the Opry. My brothers took me. It was at the Ryman Auditorium. We used to do interviews in there, and it was, I don't know if you've ever been in the backstage area, but there's not a lot of backstage room. And you just kind of stay out of everybody's way, and we do interviews everywhere, wherever you could, because there wasn't, people were really ganged up on dressing rooms and stuff. And I remember interviewing Del McCoury one night, and the dressing room was just full, because you think of the Del McCoury band, there's a lot of them, right? And the family and everybody in there, and the only room that was open was the bathroom. So Dale opened up the door, and I said, well, step in here, we'll do the interview. And we stood in the bathroom and did the interview, because it was the only quiet place in the whole building.
Is there anyone that you haven't been able to interview that you would really like to be able to talk to?
You know what? I actually do, and there's several, but I would love to do an interview with Lyle Lovett.
Oh.
I'd love to do a sit-down, long-form interview with him. I just think I've seen him do interviews before, and he just has such great stories. And he's such a thoughtful person. Of course, he's a word guy, so a songwriter, so he thinks things through. But I'd love to sit and hear his story. Mm-hmm. How about you? Who have you not interviewed that you're looking forward to interviewing?
You know, I've always wanted to interview Willie, and every time he puts out a new album or has something going on, I've always put in a request, and I've always been politely declined, but I've always gotten a response. So I'm not giving up. I hope I get a chance to do that someday. Yeah,
and I bet if you walked on his bus and did the interview, that'd be extra points too, wouldn't it?
Yeah. That's for sure. You know, he's cool, and I love when I have a chance to talk to artists like him that have been around for so long, and there are ties back to the 50s with Patsy Cline and with Jim Reeves and everyone, and you can hear some of those stories. Freddie Hart was one of the greatest that I was ever able to talk to, and he knew Patsy Cline, he knew Hank Williams, he knew Lefty Frizzell, and it was just absolutely amazing to hear the stories that he would tell you firsthand.
you have mentioned some names that really mean a lot to me. Jim Reeves' first album I ever bought was a Jim Reeves album, and I didn't know what I was buying because I had $1 and I was let loose in a record store, and I found this album with Christmas songs on it. And I thought, at the time, to a kid 7, 8 years old, I thought it was just a pretty album cover with songs on it about Christmas. And I fell in love with his voice, and still to this day is just one of my favorite singers of all time. Is Jim Reeves.
I'm with you there. He is one of the very best. I always thought if I could sound like someone, it would be Jim Reeves. And I always thought Jim Ed Brown was probably about as close as you could get to Jim Reeves' style.
Yeah, and Jim Ed had that. He had that voice to the very end too. He was a friend of mine. He used to, of course, he performed at the Opry a lot, and I thought he had that smoothness about his voice, like Jim Reeves did.
Yeah.
Well, you being a fan of that sort of music, you would appreciate this. Through the years, I've interviewed a lot of artists about. I'd ask them about other artists that I never got to meet, like Patsy Cline and Jim Reeves, and I have time and time again heard people talk about Jim Reeves' voice and how it resonated low, that you would have to be right up close to him to really hear him speak, because he had low in volume, not just a low tone. I thought that was interesting. Just, I always am interested in people's voices. They said even in the studio, if you were singing with him in the studio, you either had to have headphones on or be close to him because he sang very low.
Oh, that's interesting.
Very low volume.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, he certainly was smooth. I guess he didn't have to project to get that smoothness in his voice,
Yeah, I guess not.
Well, I know, we're living in strange times right now, and we don't really know what the new normal is, but what's on tap for you this year? What kind of projects are you working on?
I have, I'm still doing, I do quite a few interviews, and did a couple today. The way the pandemic has been for us here in Nashville as far as doing the interviews, we do them all on Zoom now, which is, I don't know if I ever really want to go back. It's so easy, and you're talking to somebody that's right in your face. It's kind of an easy way to do it, and to me, it's very personable. But still kind of trucking along with that. I'm doing the same thing as I was last year, I guess. I do a lot of voiceover, and I have a studio in my house, so I'm able to do it out of here and record that along with my show each week. And same thing each day, just hoping as we go along with this pandemic that we can get to a point where we're all back out and doing things again,
Yeah, absolutely. Well, folks, go to ShannonCountry.com. That's Shannon's official website. We'll have that information on our Facebook page, and she's also on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And you mentioned doing the Zoom interviews. You did a stellar interview with Jeannie Seeley about her latest album, and that's on your website, and I'll tell you, that was fantastic.
Hey, thank you. You know what? I love her. She's one of my best girlfriends. So when I talk to her on interviews, it's intimidating to me to talk to her because I don't know how to, turn that around. You know what I mean? It's like I just respect her so much, and I'm a fan of hers as well. But thank you, Scott. I appreciate you saying that.
Oh yeah, and that was a great album too. I'll tell you, it's a career album for her. It's the best work she's done in many years, and she still sounds fabulous, looks great, and God bless her,
Yeah, there's something about her voice to me that has gotten even better through the years.
Yeah.
Not everybody can claim that, but hers to me has. And I'm a fan of her early stuff, don't get me wrong, but she's got that, I don't know, it's a depth about her voice now that I really, really love to hear her sing.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and she's got just that little bit of growl in there, and it's just, I know, it's hard to describe, but you're right.
Yeah, growl is the word. She's got, she does have a growl to it, there's a rasp to it now, but really, really love her singing.
Well, Shannon, it has been a pleasure talking with you, and I'm going to play some of these great artists right now that we talked about. We'll play some Ray Price and Jim Reeves and Jeannie Seeley, and then, of course, we're going to have CDX Country News coming right up after that. So, Shannon, thanks so much for being on My Kind of Country.
You are the best. Thank you, Scott, for everything.